As a secular Jewish kid growing up in the US, I always had people in my life telling me how much I was supposed to care about Israel. Like, oh, you gotta go to Israel, and oh, the land. You're gonna feel such a connection to the land. And I can't express to you just how much as a kid growing up, I did not give a shit about Israel. But I still say that I was a Zionist back then because I accepted the normalcy of Israel. I accepted this total fantasy that Israel was gifted to the Jews after the Holocaust by a benevolent world order. And I had never heard the word Palestinian. I just didn't even, have any concept of the people who had been on the land where that gift was made. And being a kid in the 90s, Yasser Arafat, the First Intifada, Camp David, these were things I caught glimpses of on the news at night when my parents were watching it. And from them, I gleaned this story, which is also total fantasy, that the violence in Palestine was because of an ancient religious hate between Jews and Muslims. And this is total bullshit. I mean, Jews and Muslims got along famously until the advent of Zionism. Much better than Jews were getting along with Christians in Europe. I mean, if you need some evidence for that, here's a 1,000-page book you can read about a history of Jewish-Muslim relations. I didn't encounter any anti-Zionist Jews until I went to college. And I went to Oberlin, which is very Jewish and very leftist. And so sometimes, like at a party, this raging debate would break out between anti-Zionist Jews and Zionist Jews. And when they would start to fight, I would once again be filled with this just like deep-seated feeling of resentment of like, I don't give a shit about Israel. I don't want to have to give a shit about Israel. And I'm gonna go get a beer. But I sort of put a pin in the back of my mind of like, someday I'm going to figure out how I feel about Israel and Palestine. But while I was in college was not that day. And that day came when I was just in a Half Price Books one day and I saw Palestine by Joe Sacco on the shelf. And it's a graphic novel. And I thought, hey, if I can learn about Palestine through a comic book, like that doesn't even feel like homework. So I took it home and I read it. And because it's a graphic novel, you can read it in the space of 3 hours, and it just completely blew my mind. It blew up everything I thought I knew about Israel. This wasn't some ancient, intractable religious hate. This was settler colonialism and apartheid. This was like the Jim Crow South. This looked a lot like Nazi Germany, which I had been taught all my life to like fight against with every ounce of my being. And so from there, I thought, gee, well, I better read some books by some Palestinian authors because Joe Sacco isn't even Palestinian. So I started picking up books by Palestinian authors. And I started recommending people read Palestinian authors on social media. And doing that in 2021 earned me a Canary Mission profile. I tried to kick off a Read Palestine challenge on YouTube that only 2 other YouTubers joined me on. The video of our final wrap up of that readathon only got to this day, I think about 250 views. And for that, I was targeted by this major Zionist organization and they made this profile of me saying Sim Kern is an anti-Semite who spreads hatred of Israel and America, which is now one of my proudest badges of honor. I mean, I have a Canary Mission profile from 2021. That is an amazing accomplishment in my book. But the fact that Zionists were so determined to shut me up, so determined to silence and ban people from reading Palestinian books, that made me just want to push Palestinian books and even more. And so that's what I did on October 7th, was I just immediately after the attacks, I was like, read Palestinian books. Here are some recommendations. And I started, saying, look, I'm a Jewish author and here are like some very basic facts about the occupation. And from that, I ended up getting this huge following. So then I had this huge platform, and ever since October of 2023, I've been using it to try to, again, keep pushing Palestinian books, Palestinian stories, fundraise for families in Gaza, and talk about being an anti-Zionist Jew and sharing Jewish history that has very strong parallels to what's going on in Palestine today. And from that content, Hannah Mushabek, a Palestinian editor who's one of the owners of Interlink Books, the only Palestinian-owned press in the US, she came and asked me to turn some of my content into a book of essays. And that's how I ended up writing Genocide Bad, Notes on Palestine, Jewish History, and Collective Liberation. And my hope is that this book is going to do for other people what Palestine by Joe Sacco did for me. And my hope is that, particularly Jews, but anybody really who's apathetic about Palestine or perhaps has some Zionist indoctrination in there will see this bold cover, think Genocide Bad, hey, I agree with that. Let me see what's inside here, and just have that mask off moment where they understand what the occupation really is. So Genocide Bad is out April 22nd with Interlink Press, and you can pre-order it now. Pre-ordering it directly from the publisher gives them the most money, which supports Palestinian publishing, which is so incredibly censored in the US. So now, even though I spent most of my life trying not to give a shit about Israel, I have been dragged into it kicking and screaming by Zionists who are doing a genocide and insisting they're doing it for me in my name. And so now this is my whole life. Now as an author, my whole thing is that I'm this anti-Zionist Jewish author. I wanted to be a science fiction writer. My first 4 books are about science fiction, but now I gotta write nonfiction explaining to people that genocide bad.